Okay, hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is Maxwell Ivey. Y'all know me around the world out there now as the blind blogger. Some also know me as Mr. Midway, but I just want you to think about me as your friend Max today as we have another episode here on the What's Your Excuse show. And the show, you can find it at theblindblogger.net. And over there, you can also purchase copies of my books, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, or It's Not the Cookie, It's the Bag, or sign up for the email list for when the next book comes out about my Amtrak adventure. Now, today, I'm lucky enough to talk to another person who also went on an adventure, and I think actually hers was more exciting and more scary than mine, but each of us have our own stories, our own journeys, and some things make each of us scared and maybe not so much for others. So today I want you to enjoy as we talk with Kerry Kijewski. She is an author, a blogger, podcasts with her brother. She is a writer who happens to be visually impaired. So I want to talk to her about her trip back in January to Mexico for a writing retreat, writing in general, and mostly today about fear. So, Kerry, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Max. Thanks.
Well, good. I'm glad to finally get to talk to you person to person, if not actually face to face. But we've been exchanging emails, and I think we've been friends now for a year or more. So why don't you tell people a little bit about your story, who you are, and something about your writing and your blogging, and we'll go from there.
Well, I just want to say about you and I knowing each other for a couple of years now. It never in person, but I was so close on this trip to Mexico you mentioned, because I had to change planes, and I was in Dallas, but only for a couple hours. So I was close there, but.
Well, you must be part Texan, because only a Texan would think of Dallas and Houston as close. So,
well, yeah, I don't know.
It's about 4 hours by car, about 200 miles or so. But so you must have some Texan in you, because only a Texan would think that that's close. Okay,
yeah. It's closer than Ontario, Canada. So
that's for sure. That's for sure.
And I also just wanted to say that you said mine seems more frightening a journey than yours was. I don't know. I know there's a lot of people who you hear things about Mexico, but I don't know. New York City is a little. I'd be nerve. I have some nerves going there if that were me. So I don't know what that. But anyway, yeah. Thanks for talking to me here. Got some practice interviewing people, and yeah. So I think we met. Just a lot of these things these days is with the internet, and that's how we met, and that's how I got my writing out there, because I was writing some stuff over the years, but then it wasn't until I turned 30 and I wanted to start a blog. So that was in 2014. So I know very little about the technology side of things, so luckily I had some help with that, so I just focused on the writing, and I basically just, talking about fears, I just chucked my fear aside of people reading me and, judging me through my writing. And I just started writing, and I just started making connections through WordPress, which I discovered you can do. And I started getting followers on my blog and certain people who would read. And then I just started reaching out to certain people. I'd find their email, and I would contact them and ask if I could do an interview for my blog, or vice versa. And that's how I started meeting people through blogging, and my writing sort of grew from there.
Right. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what you write and what you would consider your style or your voice is?
Yeah. I've always written mostly nonfiction. When I was 14, I wanted to write an autobiography. So I started writing when I have this big stack of Braille. I did it with the manual Brailler when I was 14. I still have that stack somewhere. So it was always kind of memoir sort of things. And which I realized eventually that instead of autobiography, you call it memoir. there's this thing that you're not, that what do you know about writing an autobiography when you're only in your 20s or something. So I figured if I call it memoir, it sounds a little more available for everybody. But so that's my genre pretty much. When I started my blog, I didn't really know. I just wanted to start writing, and I thought I would try a little bit of everything, a little bit of fiction, short stories, and then I enjoy nonfiction of different sorts. So interviews with people, and I like to write movie reviews, music reviews, concert reviews, things like that. So my blog is called Her Headache, which is a bit strange, just because I've suffered with headaches for a long time. And I just look at it more as a broad term that life is a bit of a headache sometimes. Technology is a headache, but it's also allowed me to, open up with my writing. So that's been good.
I think that's kind of a cool name to choose. I have a friend named Suzy Carr who's an author, and her website is called Welcome Curves. So I think the fact that you are embracing the headaches and how they are part of everybody's life is a good title. Actually, it's just hard sometimes to get my stupid web browser to put it in there without trying to autocorrect it.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't know if it was the right one, but it's what I went with. And I've always been a big believer in names and the importance of titles and names of a piece I write or a blog I have, or, the whole branding thing nowadays with online.
Right. I agree with you. Names and titles are very important, and there's an endless supply of posts out there about how most people put all their effort and passion into the article and don't spend hardly any time at all on the subject. And I'm guilty of that myself. So it's subjects and titles. And I think one thing I've been noticing lately as I've been reading it more is in the Bible, names are really important, to the point that in several cases when a person's life was going to change, they were told to change their name.
Yeah, no, normally I'm pretty good at coming up with titles and names. The one I just recently had trouble with, though, was coming up with, I'm not very good at, like I said, I've been branching into a bit of fiction, short story writing and things. I've wanted to write a novel for a while, so I'm sort of back and forth in the genres. But the one thing I'm not great at is coming up with naming my characters when I write fiction. And I don't know why that is. It's easy to come up with a title for an essay I'm writing, but when it comes to fictional characters, I just, nothing feels right to me, and I would rather just forgo that part of it.
Just give them like woman A or man B or dog J. I recently interviewed a writer who said that you have to be careful picking names of characters, because in a lot of cases they're going to be with you and part of your life for many years to come, almost as if they're family, but maybe not quite family. And so I wonder if maybe that has something to do with the fact that you have so much trouble picking names for your characters.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. I just sort of follow my gut instinct a lot of the time, and if it doesn't feel right, then I feel silly doing it. But you see that a lot of times with, like you said, branding and coming up with a name for a blog or whatever. And I'm quite happy with ones I've come up with. And then I kind of branched out to travel writing after I started Her Headache, and then I wanted to start a travel blog. That's one of those things where you try something, and if it doesn't quite work, you don't consider it a failure or such. If you learn from it, and then you try again. But so I'm still on social media as The Insightful Wanderer, which is my sort of my travel name. So I have two.
I like that name. I don't think that name is necessarily specific to traveling, because wandering can have as much to do with mind and spirit and your emotions and stuff. I think that's a great name, whether you're
exactly
going to travel blog or not. But that does lead me to the question now: why did you go to Mexico? How long were you there? And what were some of the things that were running through your mind when you decided to go and when you were going?
Well, I went to a writing workshop in it's a place called San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. It's in, it's not on the coast or anything. So there was no beach time during my week. I didn't even bring a bathing suit. It wasn't about that. It's in the central, I'm not sure exactly what part exactly, but it's in like central in the middle of Mexico. So it's there's some mountains around there and you're at a higher altitude and things. But anyway, I went there because I met a travel writer a couple years ago who sort of became my mentor. And she was living there and she was putting on a writing workshop. And I'd wanted to attend like a writing workshop or a travel blogging event or something. You know, they have a lot of those everywhere and retreats and things. And often they're very big and I wasn't sure how I could navigate one of them. But I thought that's a good way to incorporate travel in there somewhere because it gives you another reason to go. So when this opportunity came up, it just sort of, she asked if I would be interested, and she made it very accessible for me, and so I jumped on it. It was last summer, so it was between last July and then January when I went that I had to make the arrangements, and I had to pluck up the courage needed, which it took that long pretty much.
What is her name, and does her retreat have a website? Because I am a firm believer in showing gratitude by mentioning the people like that. So you're more than welcome to tell people who it was and the name of the place in case other writers that are watching this want to look into it.
Right. Well, I don't know if she has her. I don't know if her website is up and running at the moment, but she's got quite the social media Facebook community around her. She's been traveling in Africa actually with a group, holding workshops and events through Eastern Africa, I think. Uh-huh. This all through March they were doing that. So she doesn't have a website up and running. I think she's got a lot of projects herself going on, but you could look her up if you want. Her name is Amy Gigi Alexander. So that's Gigi.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you know her.
And it's one of those things, lots of people online, and sometimes you have to be reminded that you know them.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, Gigi is a really great person. I haven't heard from her in a while, so now I know why. She's
all over the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell people exactly what you did do, or what a writing retreat is, as far as your time that you spent there, and if there were any projects that you started or completed while you were there?
Yeah, well, it was a week-long retreat, and it was a very small group, which was what I liked about it too. It was just, I think it was at 9. It was mostly women. It was like 9 women and 1 man, plus Amy who ran the seminar, and so that was fun. He brought a different feel to the group, but it's amazing how everybody comes together, even that size of a group, and you really bond very quickly, and that's kind of what I was looking for. I was looking for a place to make connections, especially with other writers. I have that online in several places, but I just thought this would be a new way of experiencing that. So we all just sort of, we were supposed to try and write 2 pieces in that week, one in the first half of the week and one in the second. And she gave us a few assignments, and we had to see sort of what came of that. And a lot of emotions come up to the surface through that. And I went there thinking I might write one thing, and you come away with something totally different that you weren't expecting, because you have to put together first, how scary it was for me to go and move my writing career ahead several steps and these things, but then you have to get there and see what kind of experiences are going to unfold. And I really tried to just let things happen and push through the fear. So I ended up, it was supposed to be memoir or travel writing pieces you were supposed to try and write, nonfiction. I ended up with a rather interesting experience my first full night there, where I found myself being serenaded by a mariachi band in the park. and I recorded
That's
it.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I recorded it because the assignment was to record. We're supposed to do a soundscape. So you're supposed to go to a part of the city and just record people or a restaurant or whatever, and then try and write something. And I just happened to bring my recorder when I went to the town square there, and that just sort of happened. So I ended up writing about that and how I sort of, I don't do well with attention focused on me. And there's a whole blindness thing that comes into it that I feel like they're playing for the blind girl in the park. I don't know. It's a whole thing so I wrote about that. And then at the end of the week, we were all supposed to read one of our pieces to the group. So that was really great too, because I got to see where everybody was, but you got to feel the energy all through the week. And I don't know how Amy did it, honestly. She holds a couple workshops. She has a few scheduled. So, I mean, if you look her up online, you could maybe look into that. I think she's having one in India, maybe another one in Mexico. So anyway, but yeah, I don't know how she did it. Like she took each of us out for dinner and a talk, and she kept all through each day. She would schedule, okay, I'll see you for 20 minutes. I'll talk to you. How's your writing coming along? You know, it was, I don't know. It was quite the week.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm talking with Kerry Kijewski, and you can find her at kkherheadache.blogspot.com. I believe I have that right.
WordPress.
Oh, WordPress.com. I'm sorry. kkherheadache.wordpress.com. I'll fix that. And this is What's Your Excuse, which is over at theblindblogger.net. And when I asked you to come on the show, I really wanted to talk to you about the fear, and I would like you to, if you can, not only talk about what you were feeling, but how the people around you were dealing with this, because I find that, at least with my experience, that I wasn't anywhere as scared as the people in my community were.
Yeah, I mean, at different times, I couldn't make up my mind who was more scared, but definitely my family had their thoughts. And I want to start by saying that they were all very supportive. They have always wanted me to be independent as possible and to try new things and to have experiences. And it is my parents who instilled the love of travel in me from a very young age. So they kind of planted the seeds, and then all of a sudden I'm off to Mexico and they are quite worried. So it came full circle. But no, my parents were great about it. You know, it's hard when you're a grown woman. So I was I'm 32, 33 years old. And, most times I don't know if, there's always a worry parents will always have for their children when they're going somewhere. You hear a lot of things in the news about places, like Mexico or wherever. But I felt like I had it quite planned and organized. It just, there were some bumps along the way. My mom was actually more worried than my dad, which was weird because my mom's quite a calm presence and my dad gets a little more nervous about things. But eventually she was more the worried one. And it's just the idea of me going through airports and, there's assistants who's supposed to help people who are blind with those sort of things. But, things happen and whatever. So they were worried. My siblings were great. They weren't quite as worried. They're not my parents. It's a different relationship. So they were a little more, and most people were just, wow. It was just my parents and I who had to just sort of have some talks and do all we could. I booked things with a travel agent because then we had someone to actually go in and visit in our town here and talk with. And she was great, this travel agent we dealt with, who really made it a lot easier. So, they faced this fear along with me and we just sort of did it together.
What were some of the things you did to help you either handle or distract yourself from thinking about this thing you were fixing to do?
Well, it's strange because in the past, there were a lot of things that I may have wanted to do. And even it's weird coming home again and still having fear, because you hope maybe if you do this big thing, you'll conquer it, and then everything will be easier after that. But
Life don't work that way.
no, everybody says it'll be easier next time, and you'll travel again. See, you did it this time, you can do it again. And that's kind of what my essay was about that I wrote. And it's hard to explain almost. It's one of those things that I think if you really want to do something, you will do it. In some cases, if you really want to do something, but you are really scared, there are always excuses you can find and ways you can talk yourself out of something. I could have done that a million times. And maybe at a different point, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have been ready for something like this. But I don't know, it was the perfect opportunity. It was the perfect place. Everything felt right about it. So even though I had that fear, I just found a balance somehow, and I pushed through, and it was, I don't know if that sounds hokey, meant to be sort of thing, but that's how it felt.
I personally think that there is nothing hokey at all about things being meant to be and feeling like they were given to you as a gift at just the right time. Because I felt like that myself. I told many people before I left that I wouldn't have been given the opportunity if I wasn't meant to find a way for it to all work out for me in the end. And so I agree with you. Would you feeling like it just felt right? That's something I believe in. And you said a couple of things there that I like. One is that, you can talk yourself out of it. And I like to remind myself that when it comes down to it, I'm more scared of missing the opportunity than I am scared of failure or setbacks or looking foolish. But the other thing is, we've both talked about how people think it gets easier. And I think that's one of the big myths, one of those big lies out there that I do my best to help people with is if it's something that scares you, it never really gets easier. I've talked to authors and they say it doesn't matter if it's your first book or your 10th book. When you send that book off to your editor or your publisher, or you put it online, you still have the same nerves, the same gremlins, the same monsters come calling and say, do you actually think people want to read your book? So I agree with you. It never gets easier. And people who haven't done big, scary things, they think it does. And they tell themselves, and they use it as an excuse, but trust me, people, it doesn't ever really get less scary.
No, I mean, you really have to trust people, and that's hard. I believe there are so many good people out there in the world. I've experienced it. So I knew firsthand. So that sort of comforted me going. As much as I was afraid of, maybe the bad ones who are out there, the danger that could occur, that you have to be cautious. You have to be smart about it. I didn't wander around Mexico at night by myself, but you really have to trust people to help you. Like I said, the staff at the airports, it's their job, but you hear horror stories, but I would tell myself that there wouldn't be a time when if something didn't work the way I thought it was gonna, that I wouldn't be able to find my way out of it. That there's going to be somebody there that you can reach out to. So when you can't see, for instance, you have to trust in the goodness of people, even slightly more than most people do, because you can't just look and find your gate, right? Like, I was always paranoid of listening to my music or something when I was sitting in the airport waiting for my flight, because I didn't want to look up and realize I'd missed something, or, and that almost happened to me a few times. So you really have to be aware and be paying attention, but you just have to put a whole bunch of faith in yourself and in other people. And that's a big thing for me.
I think that's one of the advantages we have as blind people, is that we get used to the idea that we have to trust others. And we also many of us get to the point where we expect the people we meet to be helpful and supportive rather than the people who are going to take advantage of us. I told somebody when I came back from New York, one of the things I really was reminded of is you meet the people you expect to meet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how that works, but I just it's hard to find a balance between, going out and doing it by yourself, and that was a big thing for me, is I'd never traveled by myself before. So that was the thing, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's
I'd
big.
traveled with parents and siblings and boyfriends and friends. And I mean, it felt nice knowing I had this mentor waiting for me. But I'd never met her in person. I'd only talked to her like I'm talking to you. So I
Right.
never met her. So you got to trust that. And I got to say that first moment when I got out of the shuttle and she stood there right in front of me, and I felt her presence, and we hugged, and she showed me, and that was a great moment, because it was like a wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't all going to be for sure easy from there on, but it felt like I was, like you said, I was rewarded. I didn't believe, oh, this woman's a scam artist. I've never met her. Maybe it's not real. Those thoughts go through your mind, that you'd be a fool because you'll get there and nobody will be there and it won't be what you thought it was. And, so things like that are just huge hurdles that you have to jump over.
Yeah, but you believed that she was this person you met online, and it turned out she was. And it sounds like you had one of those rare moments that we have in our lifetimes, that you might have, a handful of times in your life that you have one of those kinds of meetings. So I'm very, very happy that happened for you. How has the return do you feel like you're any different now that you're home? Has your writing changed any? Do you feel more like, do you now have an itch or a compulsion to travel more? How do you feel now that you're home again?
It was tricky because you kind of I have a tendency anyway to latch on to something like this workshop in Mexico and think deep in my mind somewhere that, oh, this is going to be the answer. It's going to tell me everything I want to know. It's going to point me in the exact right direction with my writing. And it's never going to be that. And it's never what you think before you go. It was 100 times better than I could have dreamed in many ways. And it did change me. And it is kind of hard. I wanted to write several pieces, even though I only could get that one out that week I was there. But I had several ideas of things I wanted to write. And it's been hard since to get back and explain to people what kind of week it was for me, mostly by the people I met and the way it has changed me. So that's tricky to say how it's changed me. But I think once I made that decision, it's kind of like when I made that decision to start my blog. It's the same thing. I made the decision, and once I make a decision like that in my life, it just seemed like other things started to fall into place. So since this year began, I've started pitching some freelance pieces, and I've gotten a few of those published, right? So things like that just sort of, it seems like once you make up your mind, it's not going to be a smooth road. And that's kind of another thing I was writing about, because it's funny that streets in Mexico are often very bumpy. And I like to always think of streets and roads as a sort of metaphor in life, even though I don't drive. But it's just made me more bold. I think more willing to just. It's like me and my writing mentor discussed. It's like to just take the leap, jump off that cliff. That's quite a dramatic image right there, but it's true. Sometimes you just have to, and it's going to be really scary and thrilling at the same time. So,
yeah, it seems like the things that are really special, things that mean something in our lives, we usually spend about half the time excited and the other half the time scared out of our minds. So, and it is interesting that we keep talking about fear, and people keep coming up with all these excuses. But it does sound like, from your experience, once you decide that you really want something, then you can find those solutions, and you can find a way to make it happen in your life. And I'm glad to see that that's what you've been doing.
I'd like to think that, but it's like we said, it doesn't really make it easier. Like, I'd like to keep traveling and writing about it because it gives you great material. I just think, not everybody has the opportunity to travel, and I've been luckier than a lot of people. But if you can, you should, because it challenges your perceptions. And I didn't always like to think about it that way, but I was a benefit to that writing class, because people in that class, there were people from all different ages, from about 30 years old till 70, I guess. That's the range. And so some of them who are older, or, some of whom maybe younger, but had never met someone who was blind, to see me, to realize that, oh, she came here by herself, and, oh, she doesn't need help to get to her room. Like, oh, she can get her own glass of water, like little things like that, to big things that were like me coming all that way. It was just good for the class. So they traveled and they met me, and their minds were broadened, and mine, because I met them and because I saw Mexico and all the things you hear about Mexico. And I could have stayed here in Canada where I feel safe. But I've wanted to see Mexico for a while, and I just think that was the perfect place for me to go. So I'd love to travel more, but it's still a big fear. Even with the things like, I'd like to write, like I said, I'd like to write a memoir or a novel, but that's the kind of thing, like you said, that's scary too. So it's all scary.
Yeah. And you just mentioned something there that, it does seem like that those of us, those people like me and you who are blind, who put ourselves out there in the world community, who don't just associate with people who are also blind, it does seem like we have an impact that we, whether we want to or not, we make other people more aware of their vision, as well as I think we challenge them to do more in their own lives. I was wanting to get your thoughts on that.
Right. Well, that's what you often hear people say about you all the time. Yeah, that's part of your whole thing. Yeah, I think so. I mean, for too long, I use my writing to do some activism stuff, and I do believe, sometimes it gets exhausting to talk about this all the time, but you live it, so you can't escape it anyway. It's in my mind no matter what I'm writing. But it's just, for so long, people with disabilities, people who are blind, they were with families who, to the best of their love for that person, they were afraid, and the person themselves was afraid, and too many people stayed hidden and just stayed home and didn't venture out, because it is a scary world to many. And that's starting to change, and I think that is important, because it's necessary.
Right. Well, one of the things that I notice even now is, we live in a great time, because as a blind person, there's blogging, podcasting, writing, many forms of online businesses that are available where you can compete right alongside the sighted people. But I still run into quite a few blind people who comment on how they don't really put themselves out there in the sighted or in the overall community. I mean, I've had discussions with potential clients where I have to tell them, I don't have a huge network of blind friends. I'm not really active in a lot of the major organizations, but I have a great following in the online world in general. And then, they would tell me that they have a great following among people who are blind, but they need help getting out into the overall online world. So it's, even though online and the internet and computers, they give us the opportunities, there are still people with vision loss who are staying amongst other people with vision loss and not putting themselves out there in the world at large.
Well, again, it feels safe, right? So
yeah,
that's where they feel safe. And depending on what kind of upbringing they've had, what kind of support they've had, where they live. I mean, the online world is great. It has opened up so much for people with technology and the internet. I can pretty much Google anything I want now, whereas, 20 years ago, I would have had to go to the library or as far as publishing and getting your writing out there. But yeah, I mean, it's still, if you're afraid, if you're frightened enough, you can still find little places to sort of duck and cover kind of thing. So it is important for those of us who have found ways to step out into the wider world so we're not only affecting the sighted world by that, but we're also affecting other blind people because they see that it can be done, and that it is being done.
Yeah, but it is kind of hard to think of yourself as being a big deal when all you're doing is what you've always done, which is you're writing, and it just happens to be a big deal to people because you're also blind. And to me, I grew up in a carnival family. I've been promoting and pitching and booking that stuff all my life. I tell people that I've done so much cold calling and emailing that I've been told no every way you can humanly be possible to be told no. So I have, lots of training in the area of putting myself out there that, comes from back when I was a carny. But I do realize a lot of people, sighted and blind, have trouble putting themselves out there in the world and asking people to interview them or let them write for their blog, or even just sending people an email directly sometimes can be a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always fighting with that side of myself that is shy and that is that doesn't want to create conflict. It doesn't want to feel the sting of rejection, a lot of those things. And so it's so easy to just not. But if I try and think of myself, 30, 40 years down the line, and like you said, if your fear is big enough, but you're also your fear of having missed out on things or not done something you really wanted to do, if that's there, then I think it's a great motivator, which, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why people don't. And I think it's important that we talk to each other to find out what those might be and see if we can help each other out.
Yeah. Besides fear, the other thing that people seem to be dealing with is, regardless of how good or bad their current life situation is, they are more comfortable with where they are and not willing to risk things being even worse than they are by making those big changes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, when you can't see especially, but for a lot of people, familiarity is key. Comfort, what you know is safety. So it's scary to think of stepping out of that. And yeah, the worst for me is the unknown, this big void that I don't know what could happen. But you come to a point where you just, what have you got to lose, I guess? I mean, everything and nothing. I like to think.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that before we started that this interview would be good practice for you. How many interviews have you done, audio or video or both?
I haven't done a lot. I've done a few I did one for a college radio station here with a guy a couple years ago. I did one with another woman who does interviews. I can't remember her name at the moment. She's on my Facebook. She found me in a group for visually impaired women, I think. I've done more written ones, but not as much. I mean, not as much as you, obviously. And
yeah, well, I'm just weird that way.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time I'm not smart enough to be scared. So and actually that all started with a stupid email that I got, or there was an open call on LinkedIn 4 years ago to come on and talk about your small business. Mm-hmm. And the guy's name was Brian the Hammer Jackson, and he was a real goofball. He was like, Howard Stern light, but I got to talk about my business. We had a horrible interview. My phone dropped the call. His system dropped the call. He got back on the line with me and he said, "What, man, are you blind or something?" I said, "Yes, I am." At which point he turned to his producer and said, was I supposed to know this? And his producer said, yes, I've told you 4 times this week. So it was one of those moments we had a real, end of the conversation for about 10 seconds, and then we laughed about it. And then that led to me going on with this guy every Friday morning for about 6 months. And after I started doing his shows, I was like, there's got to be more shows out there. And, here we are 4 years later. I've done over 100 interviews. But it all really started as one of those things that was just, as you've mentioned earlier, it just felt like it was meant to be. And the one, little nothing interview led to now something that is it's a real part of what I do. And I'm actually helping other people do it as well, which is a really good feeling to go from being the student to being the teacher. It's really cool that way. Well,
that's why I wanted to start a podcast last year. And that's the thing to do. Everybody's doing it kind of thing. But, as long as I feel like I'm doing something that I'm meant to be doing, even if it's sort of like what other people are doing, I put my own spin on it, then it feels good. So, I have a brother who's blind, so he's more into audio things. He's a musician and things. So I just thought I had good thoughts of what kind of podcast I could do as far as writing the podcast subjects and things, material, but I didn't know if I could do the audio side of it. So then when I could talk him into doing it, I haven't done a lot of interviews on the podcast as far as me interviewing others, but I would like to have guests on there too. We've only done I think we did 4 in the second half of 2016. But that just was another way. I just thought, I love writing and everything, but I do obviously listen to a lot of podcasts and audio, and I thought it was a good way of practicing that. So that's what the episodes have been up till now, just sort of practicing.
Yeah. Well, what do y'all call the show, and can they also find that on your website at kkherheadache.wordpress.com?
There are some posts on there, but the best bet would probably be to go facebook.com/ketchup on pancakes. So ketchup on pancakes.
I've never had ketchup on pancakes. I've had it on eggs and in chicken stew, but I've never had it on pancakes.
Well, again, you have to have a good premise for a podcast, in my opinion, but going back to what we were saying, I think the title makes all the difference. So that one just sort of came to us per suggestion on Facebook by someone who knew our family, because it's a family recipe. So when you think of ketchup on pancakes, most people will go, ooh, but the pancakes aren't the kind of the fluffy kind you eat syrup on. They are more of a, they're made, so it's more like you're eating ketchup on eggs, basically.
Okay. I was actually thinking it might be more like ketchup on a knish type of pancake, but yeah,
they're thinner and crispier and sort of saltier. They're made with flour and egg. It was my father's mother who made them for us when we were growing up, and we always got that reaction. It was always funny to tell our friends that name and see how they acted. It just seemed the podcast is me and my brother, so it's sort of a family premise, and so I just thought it kind of fit, and it was memorable and unique and interesting. So,
well, it sounds like a great name. It sounds like one of those names that people will eventually remember. It's so unique that it's going to stick in people's brains whether they want to or not. And it's interesting you talk about subjects when it comes to branding. It seems like here, at least on the internet, it seems like a lot of the really great names are names given to shows and websites by friends or by people on social media. I mean, I did not start out to be called the Blind Blogger. That was not something I wanted, but it was something that the sighted people hung on me and it stuck. So and of course now I'm starting to find out that name is kind of limiting because I'm starting to do many other things, but it's a website, it's my name, and people know me by it. And thankfully, you can Google that and find, dozens of responses for it. So I'm not about to give it up, but isn't it funny how some of the best names are, basically hung on us by people in our communities?
Yeah, it's great. But I'm a fan of alliteration, so the Blind Blogger I like. But it's kind of like, it's like the one website, she's one of the first bloggers I actually reached out to when I started blogging. So her website is boldblindbeauty.com.
Okay.
So there again, alliteration. I love that. But yeah, I think sometimes there's nothing wrong with listening to other people's thoughts on something. And, you know, if it doesn't feel right, you obviously don't do it. I don't think you would, but you can get some great ideas from other people and people who know you, people who don't. You can get their expertise brought into it. So.
All right. Well, I've really been enjoying talking with you. I don't know if exactly how long it's been, which is always a great sign. It's lovely having you here with me on What's Your Excuse at theblindblogger.net, and they can find you at kkherheadache.wordpress.com, and you gave out your Facebook page. You have a Twitter or YouTube link you'd like to mention?
Yeah, YouTube is not.
I'm sorry. And is there anything you've got coming up as far as some sort of a project or new adventure you've got coming up?
Well, you can also find me on Twitter at kkherheadache or at at the I Wanderer. I had to shorten it for. So it depends if you want to read my thoughts on travel, or if you'd at kkherheadache is my official one that I started with my blog. A lot of things I post there are my writing on my blog and things, but there are also a lot of more literary things. So there's those, but it's all just basically through my website, kkherheadache. Like you said, it's confusing for people. But anyway, no, I'm just basically, that's the thing about coming back from a big trip like that. And I've got some other things coming up actually that 2017 is kind of a big year for me. It's 20 years since I had a kidney transplant from my dad. So it kind of feels like a momentous year all around. So I've just been doing a few things that I'm hoping might, I've entered a nonfiction contest and a fiction short story contest here in Canada that, long shots, but you never know. But I'm planning a big, I've been to Niagara Falls 100 times in my life, but it's one of my favorite places in the world. And luckily it's not far from me. So this June, I'm actually planning to go ziplining. It's a new thing that just opened there last year with my family to sort of celebrate, because I've been trying to do things on my so-called bucket list. I walked around the outside of the CN Tower for I think it was my 18th or 17th or 18th anniversary of the transplant. So for this one, I'm going to go to my favorite place in the world with the people I love and try something new. So that's sort of something that I'm planning on writing about and trying to pitch around to places, find a good home for. So that's some stuff I've got on the horizon, plus getting back to the podcast, and started playing the violin, so I focus on that. Just trying new, I just don't want to ever be afraid to try new things and to keep trying things. So.
Well, I'm glad to see that you have that adventuresome spirit in you, and I want to thank you again for coming on and for figuring out this thing they call Zoom, and for being flexible in your schedule today, because life interrupted in mine, and I was probably about a half hour late getting here. So I really appreciate you. I love your story. I love your spirit, and it's great having at least one other person out here who is as crazy as I am, who also happens to be blind.
Yeah, well, we'll just keep cheering each other on. So thanks for the invite.
Thank you. I'm so glad to finally talk to you one-to-one, and I look forward to meeting you in person.
It'll happen someday.
It'll happen. It'll happen. I'm going to be doing a thing called DreamCon in New Jersey the end of May, and some friends that I met online have invited me to come up to Niagara and do a couple of talks for some people up there. So
really,
if I get that close, it'd be a shame not to come on across the border.
Yeah, Niagara Falls, we could probably do.
All righty. Well, we'll think about that. All right. So thank you, and you have a great day, Kerry. I really appreciate it.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, we just had a great conversation with my good friend Kerry Kijewski from kkherheadache.wordpress.com. And she is a very talented writer, and I haven't checked out her podcast, but I'm sure between her and her brother, it's awesome. And I'm really glad that she was able to join us. And we talked about a lot of things that seem to be recurring among creative people and people that are out there doing big things in their lives. And that is that fear is always there. It will always be there. It doesn't go away just because you've done something, no matter how amazing that thing may have been. And even if you're doing the same thing again, you know, if she talked about going on her next trip, there would still be some fear because it's always there. Me, as I think about where I'm going to go next, what I'm going to do next, there's always a little bit of that in the back of your mind, like, man, are you crazy? Do you really think this is something you should be doing? Don't you know all the things that can go wrong? And I was just sitting here thinking that I've pretty much finished my latest book about my Amtrak experience, how I was feeling when I applied, you know, all the stuff that went into leaving, how I dealt with fear, all the great things about that adventure. But I haven't sent it off to my editor. And it really doesn't need much. I need to go through it and do as much spell checking as I can, as much punctuation as I can. But I think I'm at that point where I'm stalling. So I know it'll be a couple weeks before anybody sees this, but today is April 3rd. And I am going to commit that by April 5th, which is Wednesday, that I will have my book to my editor, and I will post online that where she can comment and reply and verify that I've done so. I've waited, procrastinated, made excuses too long. And I know it has nothing to do with the interview, but Kerry has reminded me that sometimes fear shows itself in procrastination, in avoiding, in doing other things that maybe even things you don't like maintaining your website or sending out pitch emails or recruiting clients. It's stuff you don't exactly enjoy doing, but it's easier than doing the thing that scares you. So thanks, Kerry, for reminding me. I hope y'all got a lot out of her interview, and I hope you're reminded. I mean, here's a woman, she's totally blind. She got on a plane, went to Mexico, did this writing retreat, came back home. She's still working on her memoir. She writes almost every day, it seems like. She does all of this stuff, and if she can do it, then what is your excuse? I hope to see you over at the website, theblindblogger.net. If you need some help getting yourself out there in the world, you want help getting exposure through podcasts, radio shows, and other online media, then I'm your man. I've been doing it for myself for 4 years, and I can get you booked on radio shows, podcasts, YouTube interviews, guest blog posts, virtual summits, online magazines, all that online stuff that you don't even have to leave the house to do. All righty. Theblindblogger.net. Go over to the online publicity page, or check out the success stories page and reach out to some of the people that I'm already working with. All righty. I want to thank you for spending some time with me. I know you have lots of obligations on your time. You don't have a lot of free time to spend, and I really appreciate that you're spending some of it with me. So until next time, thank you, God bless you, and take care out there. This is Max, the Blind Blogger.